Good afternoon. Guten Erev Shabbos Chol HaMoed. I wanted to share with you some thoughts that I've been having the last few days about Sukkos, and just kind of to tie a few different things together and share some insights into some of the meaning of the Yom Tov of the holiday. If I would ask somebody a question, which Yom Tov is the focus on children, I think that most people would tell me that that would be Pesach. We know that the Seder of Pesach is geared very much towards teaching children, educating children, eliciting questions and excitement from children. And people generally look at Pesach as the yontif that is focused on children and educating them. However, if you look carefully at the Yontif of Sukkos, and especially at the Gemara about Sukkos, you'll see that children and their education play a very fundamental role when it comes to Sukkos as well. I mean, on the first page of Maseches Sukkah, it brings down the story of Hilni Hamalka, Queen Helen, who was a convert and who moved to Yerushalayim, and about her children in the Sukkah. On the last Amud of Maseches Sukkah, talks about Miriam Bas Bilga and the poor education that she received and the consequences of that. We find a discussion about at what age does a young boy have the obligation to eat in the Sukkah, and even the opinion of Shammai, who felt that a newborn boy is required to be in a Sukkah. We find a discussion of at what age is a father required to purchase a Lulav for his child, or at the very least give him a Lulav to shake. And there's a number of other such examples in Maseches Sukkah. So it becomes quite clear that the Yontif of Sukkos, children education, are quite important as well. So how does it play a role on Sukkos, and how does Sukkos differentiate from Pesach as far as this concept is concerned? And just very simply, we can say that the difference is that whereas by Pesach, we find that the involvement of children is mainly focused on speaking to them, teaching them, educating them. We don't really find by Pesach lengthy discussions about children's participating in the mitzvah actions that have to do with Pesach. By contrary, when it comes to Sukkos, the whole discussion is generally focused on behaviors. What do children have to do? When do children have to be in a sukkah? When do children have to shake a lulav? So it's much more focused on the actions of the mitzvos that the children have to do, rather than on the education that a parent is required to educate his child about the topic and the concept of the Yom Tov of the holiday. Which takes us to the question then, why? Why are we so focused on Sukkos as to children and the actions of the mitzvah? So we'll come back to answer that in a few minutes. But let's stop for a moment and discuss a little bit about next week's Parsha, which is going to be Parshas Bereshis. And I think that to a large extent, we have this idea that when Adam Harishon, Adam, was in Gan Eden, he was living the entirety of existence. I should actually say even before Adam showed up, that the entire pre-sin existence was a very idyllic, perfect state. But the reality is, we see in Chazal, we see in our stages, that that's not the case. Whether we find the famous story about the moon complaining about the fact that the moon and the sun were initially the same size, and Hashem having to rectify that. But more importantly, I want to focus on the fact that Midrashim teach us that originally the plan was that all fruit that grew, the taste of the fruit and the taste of the tree were meant to be identical. And so to speak, the earth sinned and didn't produce trees that made fruit that tasted the exact same as the tree. And that was really step one in everything starting to unravel. So what's so bad about having fruit that doesn't taste the same as the tree? And why was it important that the fruit should taste the same as the tree, even though that's not what happened? So it would seem that the idea is as follows, that most of the time when we look at things, we don't see the complete connection of whatever it is we're looking at, whatever it is that we're experiencing. We don't see its connection to its root, and we certainly don't see its spiritual connection to its original source. Because the fruit and the tree are two different things. I mean, if you would hand me an apple and send me off to an orchard in which there are all sorts of different trees, unless I happened to stumble on a tree with more apples, I wouldn't know which was an apple tree, which was an orange tree. You can't necessarily see from looking at the fruit what the source is. But if tam eitzo upirio shave, if, as was the original plan, the taste of the fruit and the taste of the tree were identical, then if you had the fruit, all you would have to do is walk around, take a bite out of a few trees or sniff a few trees, and right away you'd easily be able to figure out which tree produced which fruit. But that's not the way it generally works. That's all part of the process of Helem, of the hiddenness of the Olam, that Hashem didn't want to make it clear and blatant in our general experience how one thing connects to another in both a physical and a spiritual sense until we could clearly see God infusing everything. Hashem didn't want that. He hid that. And there, even though ideally it would have been an existence in which everything we would look at, we could see both its physical and its spiritual roots, and we could see those spiritual powers that are infusing whatever it is that we're looking at and experiencing. But the reality is that's not how it works. And in this world, we don't get to see that with complete and total clarity, and the fruit and the tree are not identical. Interestingly, one of the fruits that breaks that rule is the esrog. The esrog that we take as one of the four minim, one of the four species on Sukkos, is a fruit that our sages tell us, shetam eitzo upirio shave, that the taste of the fruit and the bark are identical. So why is this important? Right before Sukkot, we have just finished experiencing Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. The purpose of our behavior, our davening, our prayers, our tshuva on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur is not just to change ourselves, but by changing ourselves, also change the world. Lift up the world to a higher plane of existence. That we're living in the Olam, as we said a moment ago, from the term Helem. We're living in a world of hiddenness in which we can't experience all of God's presence, all of the spirituality infusing existence as we experience it. But the goal of what we did on Rosh Hashanah is to raise the world to a level in which we are able to see and discern God's presence in the world in a way in which we could not see it and experience it prior to the experience of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and Tshuva. Where is that experience supposed to take place? So, Kabbalistically, the Lulav and the associated species that come along with it, all the way down to the esrog, represent a sheer coma. They represent the full gamut of all of the spiros, of all of the spiritual existence. Interestingly, and somewhat puzzlingly, the esrog represents Malchus. Now, Malchus is the lowest rung in any full gamut of the spheros, and the rule of Malchus always is lesle migarme klum, that Malchus has nothing of its own. It's the receptacle to which all of the other spiritual powers are placed, and then we can make use of them. And despite that, it would seem that the esrog is quite the contrary. Not only does it have nothing, but it has more than the other species, because we're told that the esrog is the only one that has both taste and smell. And how could that be if the esrog is Malchus, if the esrog is supposed to be representative of the one of the spheros that actually has nothing of its own? But I think that the explanation is based on a pretty well-known story about Rav Menachem Rikanti. The story is brought down to the Beis Yosef. The Rikanti was a student of the Ramban and a very important Kabbalist. And he had a guest visiting one Sukkos. And at night, the Rikanti had a dream. And in the dream, he saw this guest writing 3 letters of the name of Hashem. He wrote a Yud, a Hey, and a Vav. And then the guest walked some distance away and wrote the final letter of Hashem's name, the Hey, some distance away. And the Rikanti was very puzzled by what did his dream represent. But then in the morning in shul, he noticed that when his guest was holding his lulav and esrog, he was holding the lulav together with the adasim and ravos in his right hand, and his left hand he had the esrog, but he had the two of them very distant from each other. And he realized that rather than symbolically combining the name of Hashem into one whole, this guest was splitting up the name of Hashem. And as a result, as long as the name of Hashem was split up, then actually the esrog, from a spiritual sense, doesn't have taste and doesn't have smell. The esrog is only functioning as the spiritual esrog when it's combined with the yud, the hey, and the vav of the lulav and the hadasim and the ravos. And then the esrog can represent the full gamut of all those spiritual powers manifesting themselves here in this world in a way of tam etzo or pirio shaveh, that the taste of the fruit is similar to the taste of the bark, that we can see all of the spiritual powers even manifesting themselves within olam hazeh, within this world. And where is that experience supposed to take place? So the Mekubalim, the Kabbalists, teach us that ideally one should be making the bracha of the lulav and esrog every single day in the Sukkah. The Sukkah is the place in which we are meant to experience the seeing of the godliness, infusing even the most mundane and the physical. We are taught that the schach, the covering of the sukkah, which is actually the essence of the sukkah, that the schach has kedusha, it has holiness. Not only does it have holiness, but the Gemara tells us it has holiness akin to the holiness of a korban, of a sacrifice that is meant to be brought in the Beis HaMikdash in the temple. We've discussed other times that the Beis HaMikdash is a place where heaven and earth meet. It's a place where the general rules of time and space don't work in the same way as they exist in the rest of the world. It's a chunk of Olam Haba, of the world to come, present in this world. And I want to suggest that a sukkah is the same idea, that infusing the kedusha, the holiness of a korban, into the sukkah and bringing down the lulav and the esrog and all four species into the sukkah. The idea is to take this empty sukkah and fill it and experience within it all of the holiness that is symbolized by the lulav, hadassim, aravos, and the esrog. And again, after the tshuva and after lifting up the world that we did on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, to be able to experience and feel and see that holiness in a way that we lack the ability to do, generally speaking, all year long. And therefore, I want to suggest that that could also be the reason why bringing children into the sukkah, involving children in the mitzvah of lulav and esrog, is so important and so focused on in the Gemara. Because children are lacking in das. Children don't have the same mature mindset and ability to comprehend and experience like that of an adult. But the point is that on Sukkos, when we are given the ability to experience the holiness in a much clearer, more experiential way than we can the rest of the world, then even children who, generally speaking, lack the ability to experience and know and understand holiness the entire rest of the year because of their lack of das, their lack of understanding. But when it comes to Sukkos, even they should have the ability and the opportunity to do so. I'd like to thank everybody for listening. I want to wish everybody a wonderful Shabbos, and we should all be blessed with the ability to be able to experience Hashem's presence, his spiritual presence within our sukkahs, within our lulavim and esrogim, and within all of our actions as we continue on for the second half of the holiday of Sukkos.